Hi, everyone. This is Catching Up with the Nerds with your hosts, Tom and JC. This is a podcast about two dads that are catching up on all the nerdy stuff we missed, sharing how we pass on our nerdy passions to our kids, and deep dive into nerdy pop culture to make it more accessible for you, our listener. I'm one half of your podcast host. This is Juan Carlos Garay, but everybody calls me JC. I am currently in Portland, but am originally from Honduras. Before living in Portland, I was living in London where I met Tom. And before that, in the States. And before that, I was originally from Honduras, as mentioned. And I've got two lovely kids, an 11-year-old named Aiden, a 5-year-old named Arabelle, and I'm married to an amazing woman called Fiorella. We all call her Fio. And I am very much into graphic novels. That's kind of been my bag. And I love video games and movies and series and all things nerdy. And love to talk about it with Tom.
Excellent. I am Tom Arnold. I'm the other half of the podcast. Originally from France, as you can hear, the thick accent coming through the microphone. Moved to the UK about 20 years ago, which is where we met. Not that long ago, about 10 years ago, I think, something like that. What else? I've got two lovely kids also. Emily, 11, who's the same age as Aiden. Make the connection there. And Louis, who's almost 4. I'm married to Elizabeth, who is also named Liz. I like the Queen. What else do I have? Who is also lovely, as she'll be listening to this. I'm very much into video games, retro gaming, all new, whatever. I play everything. I love comics, movies, the Marvel Universe, Batman. That's me. And a little bit of anime stuff.
This is part 1 of a 5-part PlayStation miniseries. Today's episode, we'll be talking about the PlayStation 1 launch and everything that happened around that time. Enjoy. Shall we dive into our first console?
Yeah, start at the start, JC. Start at the start.
Okay, so I was actually going to start with PS1, but Tom just earlier kind of mentioned that it actually is not PS1, it is PlayStation, and PS1 actually comes a little bit later, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
The way we're going to kind of kick each of these off is have a little bit of a kind of cultural grounding in regards to what was more or less happening in the world when these consoles launched. In the case of PS1, it launched in 1994 and was the main console for PlayStation, for Sony, up until 2000. So between 94 and 2000, just things that kind of we pulled out is like really this launches at the birth of the internet, right? It's like this is when the internet really is becoming available. All of us are on AOL listening to like yeah, and doing all that stuff. The whole world is thinking the world is coming to an end because it's going to be Y2K and we're all going to like lose energy for the foreseeable future or whatever. And then nothing happens.
Planes were meant to fall out of the sky as well. I remember that one.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And just through sheer desperation, as we're facing down Y2K, the whole world gives up, and hence France wins the World Cup. Oh, you knew that was coming. You knew that was coming. No, but France does win the World Cup in 1998. It was a shout out to half of our brand, which is the French brand, with Thierry Henry leading that charge.
And more of a Zidane thing.
And well, that was a headbutt, and we don't talk about that.
No. That's 2006.
Oh, that's right. Jump. It is like sorry. I got my World Cups confused. So the PS1 launches during this time, and for me, one of the big kind of like changes with the PS1 was the fact that it had a disc. And this was kind of pretty game changing in the industry, that it was no longer cartridge based. So what's the history behind that one, dude?
So I think the what we want to put it in context to very briefly explain how Sony launched itself into the video game industry, right? So it was unknown fact up until very recently, where it was revealed that Sony was working in partnership with Nintendo to launch a Super Nintendo CD. I think that's the name of it.
Yeah.
And Sony was meant to produce, or there was a beta version that was produced of it, of the Super Nintendo CD, where it was just an add-on that you stick to the base of the Super Nintendo and you put a CD in there. It's a bit sort of like the Mega CD on the Mega Drive, if you had the Sega. And I think in 91, what I have on my notes here, 91, Sony announced that it would be a thing, there would be a Super Nintendo CD. And Nintendo went, nah, we don't want to do that anymore, because we can't sort of work out how we're going to split profits and costs and all that. It's a money decision again. And they decided to go and partner, Nintendo did, decide to go and partner with Philips to do exactly that, to launch the next add-on for the SNES. But that never actually happened, I believe, because there was I think I can't recall any extension or add-on to the Super Nintendo that involved CDs or anything like that. So obviously the move from Nintendo massively annoyed Sony, which was a massive what's the word? What's the actual word I use?
Consumer
electronics leader. That's the word. Thank you. And they say, you know what, we're going to create a division of Sony, which is going to be SCE, Sony Computer Entertainment. And we are going to create a console made 100% by us and the way we want it to be. And bang, a couple of years later, they came up with the Sony PlayStation 1, or Sony PlayStation, how do they call it? So you piss off Sony and they create their own brand. Basically, that's what happened. Thanks, Nintendo.
So they went all FUBU for us, by us, man. Nice.
Exactly. Well, you know what? Enough of this. So and hence, this is why the leap from cartridges to CD-based or disc-based games started.
Well, first of all, the thing that finally jumps out to me is it sounds like Sony's had a bit of a history then of like not playing nice with partners, because we're seeing it with Disney right now, right? With Spider-Man. It's like for a while there, Spider-Man was up for ransom. We're just like, all right, Spider-Man will be in only Sony movies, no Marvel movies. And that was a thing for about like 2 months that they like stuck to their guns, and then they reconciled, they kissed and made up.
So again, being part of the Sony movies, Sony TVs and movies family, that was going on for years before. The contracts thing was if Sony owns Spider-Man, the character Spider-Man, the brand Spider-Man.
Yep.
And Marvel wanted to buy the entirety, the whole thing, and Sony went, you know what, that makes so much cash for us that we obviously not going to let it go. So they decided, we'll eventually, I think there was a deal that got struck, and they said, oh yeah, well, we give you 49% of Spider-Man, we keep 51, you get to use him in X amount of films and blah blah. You can tell, there's a history of not really playing with others, or maybe keeping your properties in check and making sure that you do it the way you want to do it. So you're not relying on anyone else, which it's a strength. It's also it can lead you to very different ways, but Okay,
cool. Because I think that'll come up as we look at like the how the console wars are evolved between PlayStation and Xbox, and really how PlayStation was always kind of very, very aggressive, but also led to some really cool stuff happening for us consumers, right? But kind of coming back to the PS1, now that the PS1 has a disc, at least for me, one of my big takeaways when I first saw that was, so if it's not working, can I still blow on it like I do with the cartridges? Because the cartridge is always like, you blew on it, stuck it back in, and it worked. If you're doing it again, you blew into the actual console, and it's like, and then for some reason I saw a headline the other day, which once again maybe came full circle. I don't know if you saw this, that like, this was a legit press release. Like Sony, was it Sony or PlayStation? Sorry, Sony or Xbox. One of the two, Sony or Xbox, was asking people not to vape into the console.
Xbox.
What the heck was that about?
It's just some people say basically the again we'll touch on it later on when we talk about the next generation, which is now the current generation, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. They're giant, like the new consoles generation are literally just giant fans. So because they want to keep things quiet and cool. So the Xbox is just this huge tower, and people were just blowing smoke up it. So to see if the fan would just kick it out of the top of the console.
That's awesome.
And
I
they went,
love it.
you can't do that. Please don't do it. You're gonna ruin
it. So that's hilarious. It's funny. It's like we go from like blowing into the console just to like keep it working to like, let's see what happens when you vape through it. But coming back to kind of PlayStation 1, then, like for us kids, I was definitely like a Sega and Nintendo kid. For sure. And more like, funny enough, I was more of a Sega kid, if I'm honest.
Same.
And why would someone want to make the move to PS1? Why was it a big deal?
So I think the PS1 was really the transition from 2D to 3D, but 3D done properly, you know. Granted, now if you go back, you know, I would I would give you a challenge to go back and play the PlayStation 1 now, after where we are now. It's not aged well. But at the time, you looked at, you know, I think you've got Virtua Fighter on your list. I think it's more Tekken. So as a fighting game, you look at Tekken and you were like, whoa, amazing. You got a space, you know, you move. You're no longer like in Street Fighter when you're just moving from left to right and right to left. Now you can go deep. You can go, you know, at the end of, like, you imagine a square stage, you can go to the edge of that stage. You be careful not to fall off the stage. There's a bunch of stuff now that's integrated into it. So it's the first time that 3D gaming is done effectively, and it's done well enough that it doesn't look horrible at the time. Remember, you go back to, was it 94 is when it launched? There was nothing. No other gaming console was powerful enough to pull off a great looking 3D games. So you look at that and you say, okay, well, why would I go? What was the consoles that were they was competing against? It was against the Saturn and the Nintendo 64. And the 64, everything was cartridge based, and that means there's a very limited amount of room for developers to effectively run great 3D games. Move to the CD. I can't remember what it was. A CD, I think, is 625 megabytes of data on the CDs, and it's a huge leap between a cartridge, which is a few megabytes. And you jump to CDs, and it's like, whoa, I've got room to expand and room to do nice 3D graphics, nice, even 2D, hand-drawn 2D, you know, and it was easy to develop as well.
And to on the 3D graphics bit, it's like I felt like I'd only seen graphics like that before on actual arcade video games. Well, no, like in the arcade, like when I went to arcade, right? And then it's the first time that I saw it in a console, where I was like, oh, wait a second, like I can get that experience here. And Tekken in particular stands out, because for me, like the Tekken, like I'm sure there's a lot of like the graphic elements were super amazing, like, but for me, Tekken was so like the game where I could kick like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yay.
Like that was how I remember, like the roundhouse kicks they did and stuff like that. Just like so cool when the camera just like zoomed around them. It was amazing. So that for me is like a real memory of Tekken. But with PS1, it definitely felt like there was a big change. I think we were talking about earlier, from talking about like 8-bit graphics to 16-bit to 32-bit.
Oh yes.
And how Nintendo followed that logic, and then PlayStation just went, don't worry about megabits. It's like, it's about the graphics.
Yeah, so it's kind of the end of the end. There's not really been an end of in terms of console wars, but like do you remember how Nintendo and Sega fans used to go at each other then? Because Sony was a new player, that's disappeared, because it's like, oh well, they're the new cool kids, you know, they just started school here, you know, it's the cool kid with the long hair. So that was them then. It's like they got in there. Sega was still there with the Sega Saturn, which was not doing well in Europe. Well, no, in Europe they did okay, didn't do well in the US, did amazingly well in Japan, which is the home of PlayStation now.
Yeah.
But Sega was sort of already on the way down there. They never really managed to go past the Mega Drive in terms of successful consoles. You can argue the Dreamcast, but that's for later. And then Nintendo was the same thing. 64 was okay, and they named it the 64, and they were still playing into that bits. Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1, there's no mention of it. There's like, it's 3D gaming now. That's it. Like we don't care. It's not 128 bits, it's not the 64 bits. And I think we did argue before we started recording. It was like, well, I told you, I was like, well, the 8 bits, 16 bits, 32 bits, it never actually meant anything. It doesn't mean it's more powerful. It's just a graphic. It's an ability from the console to handle graphics and music a better way. But in the grand scheme of a console, doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything.
Interesting. So it's all marketing then, basically.
It's marketing based thing that they use to. I think that one of the ones that heavily relied on this was the is it the Jaguar 64, whatever it's called, when they went full on and went, hey, look, our console is so massively powerful. It's it's the best thing ever. They're barely sold anywhere. But that was at that time in history, the history of video gaming, was still very much the power macho sort of element to it, where look at us, we've got edgy games, we've got this console that will blow your mind, it will cook you breakfast, but it's the most powerful thing you've ever seen. But I was abandoned by Sony. They went, look, CDs, 3D gamings. You can play music on your TV. Ooh, that's amazing. You can read CDs, audio CDs on it. You can watch high fidelity full motion videos on it. Ooh, amazing. It looks shit now. At the time it was amazing. So that's it's sort of, I think to me, is when you see a bit of like in the Cold War, when things gets relaxed and it's no longer about a fight between brands. It's like, okay, Sony is here now. Look at us. This is what we're doing. Let's chill on the fight between Sega and Nintendo. You guys are no longer that relevant right now. You're about to get relegated. You're not here anymore.
You can go fight over your bits. We're gonna take the big money.
It's exactly that. We'll take the money. You guys go fight in the other room. Come back in 5 years. We'll talk.
So Tom, one of the things about the PlayStation is that eventually got called PS1. Actually, was a separate console they launched. What was that about?
That was to avoid confusion with the upcoming PlayStation 2. Because obviously the PlayStation at the time was called Sony PlayStation, not PlayStation 1, because obviously I don't think they were ready for the success of the PlayStation 1, and maybe there was no follow-up, maybe, don't know. So Sony went out of their way and they kind of repackaged, reformatted their PlayStation, the original PlayStation, into a smaller console, which was rebranded as the PS1. And that got released mid 2000. I believe the PlayStation 2 was already out at that time, because the PlayStation 2 came out also in 2000. So they re-released it to sort of extend the life of the PlayStation 1, which was still selling very well at that point. So there's nothing, I think technologically, there's not a massive breakthrough between the PlayStation and the PlayStation 1. It's just a smaller version of it, and a sexy looking version of it as well, because I think it looks pretty cool. So yeah, that's it. I think it's just a rebranding in a way of the PlayStation 1, of the PlayStation to PlayStation 1, just not to confuse everyone like Microsoft's doing right now with the Xbox, which we'll get to.
Cool. All right. So with a PlayStation, any one game do you want to recommend to people to get into, any couple of games that you would say people should check out?
Yes, I mean, I think we want to break it down in games that you could pick up with and play with your kids, or your kids could play. So the obvious one for me was Crash Bandicoot, because that's one of the biggest game on PlayStation 1. There's Spyro the Dragon, and then your favorite, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which I think you mentioned, and you said that you used to play that game on and off, but you used to love the vibe of the game. I think is the gist of it.
Oh yeah.
The
And for
music.
me, it was. I think it was actually. Yeah. It was the first time that I played like an open world game where I could just
Yeah,
wander about in the game, and for me, it was just super interesting. And it was one of those games. I think I was telling you that like I loved playing, but I never played for long. Like every
yeah,
time I sat to play, like after half an hour, I get bored, but I would always come back to it regularly,
yeah.
and that's a
It's a
cool
great
one.
game. And then
Yeah.
the big ones as parents, as adults, that you shouldn't play with your kids. Silent Hill, obviously. Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid, you can play with your kids, but then that's the themes. The theme of the game is it's not an easy story to you know explain to your kids. It's definitely very convoluted, and it's not an easy one to explain. So it's out there, but it to me is the greatest game on PlayStation 1, Metal Gear Solid.
Oh,
uh,
really? Oh,
yeah,
cool.
yeah, it's easily the best one. And then if you like your racing games, I like my racing games, and I know it was a massive hit when it came out with Gran Turismo.
Yeah. Oh,
With
right.
the
So Gran
amount of
Turismo
cars, yeah,
was an original PlayStation game. All
yeah,
right.
and
I
the
didn't know.
graphics I remember was like nothing we've seen at the time for a racing game on home consoles. It was just mind blowing. You can also add in Wipeouts, because I think that blew people away also with the 3D and the music and the speed,
Yeah.
which was like a technological demo of what the console could do at the time. So Wipeout also would highly recommend that. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Catching Up with the Nerds. We will see you in the next one.
Yeah, and tune in to the next episode in the miniseries. And up until then, stay nerdy and catch up with your nerdiness. Take care, guys. Bye.